So Dee, why don't you introduce yourself to the LinkedIn audience?
Yeah, sure. Thanks ever so much, George. Hi, everybody. I'm Dee, and I am the COO of a HR research company, research and sourcing company here in Dubai Global Business. I'm really happy to be joining George and just starting right from the start of the story, right, with Bitcoin, to just kind of bring the whole concept of Bitcoin to the audience. So thanks for having me, George.
Thank you so very much, Dee, for doing this. And a big shout out to Podster, who is a podcast who arranges podcasts all over Dubai. And they do have a WhatsApp group. And that's how we got introduced as well. So huge shout out. Yeah.
Yeah, massive shout out, because I mean, it's great. This is the whole point of having great communities, right? We can all sort of meet each other and sound off of each other. So yeah, shout out to Podster.
Absolutely.
George and I up.
Yeah, so what I tend to do is, I tend to go live with a good friend of mine, that is Marcus Shintita, every Thursday. And that is the Blockchain DXB podcast. But I'm starting a new platform called as Bitcoin DXB. And this platform is focused only to do with Bitcoin. Nothing to do with cryptocurrencies as such, nothing to do with the so-called blockchain or Web3 hype, just focusing on Bitcoin. And my aim and our aim is to focus on, let's say, politicians. Because yesterday, President Donald Trump got sworn in, focus on high-net-worthy individuals. And I very strongly feel even, educational institutes, because one thing which is definitely lacking in the Bitcoin space, people getting access to the right information. So hopefully, a particular episode is one of those.
Yeah, 100%. I think it can seem very overwhelming when you just want to navigate the space and making sense of it. And I think if where is the source of truth? And if you're just going to follow, somebody on YouTube that's shilling a coin, you can go down the wrong path, let's just say.
Exactly. And one of the things that I often get questioned by a lot of people is, what is the price of Bitcoin? And I immediately say, forget about the price of Bitcoin, try to understand what Bitcoin is. So what I want to do is, focus on Bitcoin at 3 different levels. One is beginner level. Someone who's completely newbie into the Bitcoin space, they can probably go ahead and understand it. And I may as well make my dad listen to it because he still doesn't know much about Bitcoin. And then we'll talk about advanced level, and hopefully we can talk about technical stuff as well. Now, when you're doing the technical session, we might be able to share something on the computer, because it's really difficult to just do a voice explanation on technical concepts. So let's start off with today's episode. Thank you once again for doing this. Let's kickstart by discussing what is the definition of Bitcoin. Now, how would you define Bitcoin? And based on your experience, even being in the HR field, what do people define Bitcoin as, and what is their understanding regarding Bitcoin? What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, look, there's so many layers to that, as in what is the official definition to what is the perception of it. I mean, if I start with my take on it, quite simply, a peer-to-peer, decentralized way of us moving a source of funds, if you like. So I can send you Bitcoin, and there's no banking institution between us for me to be able to do that. And it's, there's a record of it on the blockchain. So that would be sort of how I would kind of think about Bitcoin, a decentralized peer-to-peer system. Now, probably if you ask them out on the street, there's many definitions of Bitcoin, right? From it's a scam.
Exactly. Yeah, that is one of the topmost things.
Right to it's a store of value, digital gold. So I think there's lots of definitions, but I'd be interested to sort of hear, well, what you think how do you define it? And then maybe, how does the creator, Satoshi Nakamoto?
That is such a brilliant question. How did the creator define Bitcoin is? Because if you go to the Bitcoin Whitepaper, the proper definition is peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It sounds a bit handful. And we'll definitely take a deep dive into, what is it that means peer-to-peer electronic cash system. But I do want to share a really funny example of what Bitcoin's definition is. I was in the gym, and this was a JW Marathon. This was, I believe, in 2015. And I was speaking to one of the guys who I believe was an Emirati, and I told him, do you know what Bitcoin is? It is. And he just put his hand on my shoulders. Brother, I work for CID. And if you're ever in trouble, I know who to find. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just asking what Bitcoin is.
Right.
So the definition of Bitcoin, has gradually changed over a period of time. Scam, that is definitely one of the first things people say. But more importantly, Dee, before looking at the definition, I think people are more concerned about the price, and rightly so as well, because that is what gets people intrigued into what Bitcoin is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I often call it as Internet of Money. Now, I do have my Blockchain DXB podcast, and one of the questions which I tend to ask every of my interviewee is, how would you define Bitcoin? And everyone is given different explanation.
Yeah.
According to me, and my personal definition is, Bitcoin is the purest form of money. Now, other one's definition would be different. One thing I've noticed is a lot of the Bitcoin maximalists, they often talk about Bitcoin in terms of the value that they are spending at work, and they make a comparison, let's say, to fiat currency. So let's say if they are getting the salary in US dollar or British pound, the value is getting down, and they're blaming the government for it, but they are finding Bitcoin as a resource, where they can fight away from all the inflation. That is some of the Bitcoin hardcore maximalists are talking about regarding the definition of Bitcoin. But to answer your question, Satoshi Nakamoto defined Bitcoin in his white paper as peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And yeah, I'd really urge listeners, to just go ahead and just surf through it because it is slightly technical. But what we want to do is, we want to break down two parts of it, that is what is peer-to-peer and what is electronic cash system. So when you talk about peer-to-peer, this is something which, a lot of OGs also talk about peer-to-peer. And it is actually something that you talked about. The transactions are peer-to-peer. There is no central person, there is no middle person, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, this if we have to sort of send money now, but in the traditional sense, how would I send it? I'd have to go online onto my online banking. So I'd have to go into the banking ecosystem, initiate that transfer, and they would use whatever the SWIFT system or how, you've got sort of the Visa, the MasterCard, that ecosystem, however that money goes through whichever many intermediaries, especially if we're crossing international, if it's an international transfer, for example, then it's going to go through all of those different banking ecosystems to land the other end. And obviously, historically, that could take days. I know now in the, with sort of WISE, we can make sort of faster transfers internationally, but it's going through the banking, the centralized institutions, ecosystems. You don't have much choice other than to put your money through those networks. So that's the sort of traditional centralized way that we're all used to today. So this is sort of bypassing all of that.
Exactly, yeah. And so it's essentially just peer-to-peer, no central person, no mere central person involved, no authority involved as well.
Yeah.
And if you talk about the second part, which we will get into in a bit as well, and that is to do with electronic cash system. And this is now something which I've noticed a lot of people know about it, because there's a lot of hype regarding the 21 million coin, that the supply is fixed, there is halving, and we'll very briefly touch base on this. But at a very basic level, when you talk about electronic cash system, it just talks about, that the supply is fixed. And because the supply is fixed, it is the basics of demand and supply, isn't it? The supply is fixed, the demand keeps fluctuating. So I kind of agree to the definition of what Satoshi Nakamoto has said. Peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So I kind of like the definition, but it is not that catchy, isn't it? So if someone asks you,
what do you call it?
I often call it.
That's what
digital gold. Yeah, that is something which people talk about it a lot as well, isn't it?
Yeah, digital gold. Call digital. It's easier to catch. Bitcoin, digital gold, Ethereum, the silver. So people are trying to bucket like what is it? But maybe if that helps people catch it, then
Exactly. One thing which I've noticed, and this is only since the last 6 months or so, I reply to people stating, Bitcoin is the most purest form of money, and immediately I get a respond, wow. Because it sounds a bit too catchy, it's a bit too cheesy as well. But at least I would like to define Bitcoin as long as, I get people's attention. I think that is what solves the entire purpose. Now, let's talk about the history of Bitcoin, and this is something not a lot of people talk about it. And there's one specific word I'd really like a lot of people in the Bitcoin space to talk more about it. And there was a little bit of drama regarding that, which was initiated by BlackRock. And hopefully we'll try to very briefly touch base on that. But when you talk about the history of Bitcoin, a lot of people think that Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency.
Right.
Now, technically, yes, and technically, no as well, because there were cryptocurrencies that existed before Bitcoin as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, and I think, from my understanding, Bitcoin, there were the previous sort of versions, but they had they still had problems with the double spending issue.
Yes.
So Bitcoin sort of iterated on that and built upon that and solved that as an issue. So I don't know if you sort of want to explain that concept. Yeah.
So before Bitcoin, there were quite a lot of currencies or cryptocurrency that existed. Now, one of the most famous one, according to me, is something called as eCash. And the reason why I like this is because of the founder, that is Adam Back, who was also from London, by the way. And according to me, I think, he might be Satoshi Nakamoto. I'm definitely guaranteeing on that.
That's the killer question. Who is it?
Well, hopefully in the technical series, we'll try to dwell deeper into who is Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, there's another one called as B-Money, and this is something which a lot of people who are into the Ethereum sector, they would have heard about it. There is a unit of gas fees called as GWAI or Gwei.
Oh, Gwei, yes, gas fees.
Correct, yeah. And that is named after a guy called as Wei Dehu from B-Money. Now, fun fact is, along with Satoshi Nakamoto, even he has disappeared. No one is able to identify who he is or she is. Mystique. That makes it so much interesting, isn't it? And then there was BitGold, then there was Hashgas as well. Now, so to answer your question, what is double spend? And as the word indicates, double spend, it just means the same crypto can be spent more than once. Let's say, for instance, he has a crypto called as Bitcoin. Let's say if she has only 10 of those.
Right.
She was in a position to spend more than 10. So she could, let's say, give 2 to a friend, 2 to a boss, 2 to a client, 2 to someone else, and at the same time still have 10 coins.
Right.
So that was one of the drawbacks with, Bitcoin. Now, what Satoshi Nakamoto did is essentially he solved the double spending problem.
Right.
Now, I'd really like people to talk about the word double spend because right now there is this massive narrative regarding central bank digital currencies, and we'll briefly touch base on that. And central bank digital currencies, they can go ahead and double spend. And I'm not sure if you've heard about this hype regarding tokenization, because that is a new hype building up. And with tokenization also, you can go ahead and double spend. So technically speaking, they don't work under the blockchain protocol, and that is something which we'll delve into in our future sessions. So to answer your question, Satoshi Nakamoto essentially solved the double spending problem. Now, how did he solve the double spending problem? And this is where it gets a bit nerdy and technical.
Right.
Essentially what he did, he merged 3 things. He merged cryptography, hashing algorithm, and also mathematics. Now, at a beginner level, we won't get into details of what cryptography is or what hashing algorithm is. Probably in the advanced session, we'll take a deep dive into this. But listen, I don't know a single line of coding, D.
No.
Can still, most of my friends, they don't understand a single line of coding, but when you talk about cryptography connected to Bitcoin, they know it ins and out. Even hashing algorithm, they know it in and out. So we don't need to know coding as such. Even at a basic level understanding, you can truly understand what cryptography is used and what hashing algorithm is used. The only thing I'll tell our listeners, especially who's getting new into the Bitcoin space, is that the cryptography or hashing algorithm that Bitcoin uses is something called a SHA-256, essentially the secure hashing algorithm 256. And what our listeners should do is, just go to Google and just type in SHA-256 generator. So all that is, you put in your data and it gives you a different output, and that output is a long series of numbers that we see. So whenever we see Bitcoin transactions, we see the long series of numbers, isn't it? But,
the address, yeah, absolutely.
Now here's the interesting thing. Even if you take the entire world's data and put it into SHA-256, it'll give you a similar characters of numbers.
Right.
It isn't like, because you put in more data, the number length will increase or something. No, it's exactly the same. So at a beginner level, as long as you understand that is more than enough. And a comparison at a beginner level, what I would suggest people to understand is, think of your ATM password. Your ATM password is just 4 digits long, isn't it? But SHA-256 is so many digits longer. Now, at an advanced level, we'll go into technical details and find out what it actually contains. But as long as you understand what SHA-256 is, and listeners can just go in Google and just play around with it. Now, military personnel, in order to do
what do they use?
They use 512, which is double of SHA-256. And I don't know how it is created or calculated. And as a user, we don't need to understand how it is calculated, isn't it?
No, I think at this sort of, I mean, that sort of goes.
Because all we want to do is we have Bitcoin, we just go out and spend it. That's about all.
But probably worth kind of mentioning at this point is, how are those Bitcoins created? If we talked about miners, for example, their role in this, that might be kind of useful. Because, Satoshi Nakamoto solved this double spending problem essentially by, a few factors, but one of them is that whole proof of work concept. The miners, how they were essentially mining these Bitcoins. What is mining? That might be something useful for the
and that
audience.
Is where, the second part of the definition, that is electronic cash system, kicks in. So how Bitcoins are created. Now, before that, Dee, let's just elaborate on the peer-to-peer aspect of it. And we touched most of it, I think so, isn't it? We talked about how long it takes to go out and do the transactions. We talked about peer-to-peer.
Sorry, go on.
Regarding peer-to-peer, I just wanted to ask one question, Dee. What do you call the B-cell? I'm not sure if you use the B-cell at all. Or
I do, yeah, I do. It's so for those that are listening, a sort of a place you can buy and sell used items mainly, I suppose. So you can advertise your goods and sort of find.
And I think there's something similar, Gumtree in the UK, isn't it?
There's Gumtree, and then there's obviously things like eBay. eBay is quite big, the Vinted for clothes, etc. So place, I can connect. You're selling your headphones, and I can buy them.
Yeah. Would we consider that as peer-to-peer as well? What is your thoughts on that?
Essentially, look, if you're selling your headphones right now, you said you post your advert onto Bizzle, I see them, I want them. I'm going to reach out to you. You and I are then going to do an exchange. Now, what is that exchange? If I give you cash, then I've given you cash, you've received the cash. There's no record of our transaction anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
If I'm using cash.
Yeah.
But if I was to use my card, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know why you would receive it via card, because most of us wouldn't be having ATM terminals to receive, in that secondary market. But if I was to do a bank transfer to your bank, then there's a record in the banking ecosystem of that transaction having taken place. But if we're using fiat currency cash, there's no record of that. So essentially, this is now Bitcoin. If I was to send you Bitcoin, there is a record of that on the blockchain, right?
Exactly, yeah. And everyone can go ahead and verify that these transactions are done. And this goes back to, what is it that the miners do? And this is where, regarding, we're talking about peer-to-peer electronic cash system, the second part of the definition. So how it works is pretty simple. Let's say if D sends 10 Bitcoins to me, firstly, it goes into something called as a mempool. Are you going to give me 10 Bitcoins, Steve? That'd be great. So essentially, it goes into something called as a mempool. And, there are miners who are spread all across the world. So what these miners, they do is, they got and put these transactions. And one thing which is very important, at least for newcomers also to understand, that miners' role is to only update the transaction. They cannot make a decision that this transaction should not be put onto the blockchain.
Yes.
That is all done by Satoshi Nakamoto's genius move of cryptography, hashing algorithm, and mathematics. It is all done by the code. So this is one of the genius things. And if you compare it, let's say, with our banking industry, the banks can reject and say, hey, you can't go and send these transactions. We don't think so that these transactions or funds are legitimate, isn't it?
Yeah. Or they could put a cap, you can only transfer this much today. So you're not in full control of your ability to send, receive money and, in a timely way necessarily. That it's the bank that would take that call.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this thing is correct or not, but in El Salvador, let's say if you go and send your funds via the banking account, your banks can reject your payments, but they don't have to give you a reason as to why the payment is rejected.
Right, now, that's interesting.
That is really interesting. And I'm sure this might be happening only in few countries, but in, let's say, in Dubai or India or UK, I'm sure they would give you the reason as to why the transactions have got rejected. But in case of Bitcoin, transactions just cannot be declined. The transactions definitely will have to go through. So what these miners, they do is, you remember we talked about the long series of numbers once you into SHA-250. Essentially, what these miners are doing is they're just trying to use a lot of computational resources, proof of work, and they want to go out and find out the long series of numbers. Now, again, this explanation is only at a very basic beginner level. At an advanced level, we'll find out, instead of DN sending Bitcoin to me, there might be hundreds and thousands of people sending the funds. So the SHA-50 to the transactions that goes into SHA-256, that keeps on increasing. And then all miners have to do is go out and find these numbers. And once they do that, they are rewarded with newly minted Bitcoin. So that is essentially how Bitcoin is created.
Yeah, and that's their incentive to be miners. And so, I always think of miners as, they're the ones who are solving this mathematical puzzle. And essentially whoever solves it the fastest gets to, basically is able to add the block to the blockchain, essentially. So, so these are these miners are, using a lot of energy and resources to solve these. And the mathematical kind of jigsaw thing they're trying to solve is getting harder and harder as Bitcoin becomes scarcer, is my understanding.
You're absolutely correct. And I do remember back in the day in 2012 and 13, you could go and mine Bitcoin just with your laptop.
Right. Okay.
You could do it, fairly easily. But right now, the amount of electricity required, it is absolutely, absolutely humongous. Right. And I believe for the 8 times in a row, the difficulty has gone and increased. And again, for someone getting new into the space, all they're trying to do is, they're just trying to find out a series of numbers. So if you go to SHA-256, you'll understand what you're talking about. So essentially, people are spending a lot of money just to find a series of numbers. Right. So that is kind of crazy as well in a way, isn't it? But that is what that secures the entire Bitcoin blockchain. So essentially what it is, the blocks, they get chained to another block, which we'll probably look at in the advanced section as to what is it that Satoshi Nakamoto did. So essentially there's, the SHA-256 and there's Merkle tree, and how it gets added on to the next block. But as long as we understand the definition of Bitcoin, that is peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Now, right now, everyone is talking about the Bitcoin halving.
The halving events.
Yeah. So the way how Satoshi Nakamoto designed the entire software, so to speak, every 210,000 block, the newly minted Bitcoin is halved. So when Satoshi Nakamoto started the Bitcoin network, roughly around 10 minutes, there were 50 Bitcoins given. So imagine on your laptop getting 50 Bitcoins.
Right. Can you imagine?
So he designed it in such a way. And this is where, the economics of money kicks in as well. Every 4 years.
If I'm not wrong, today those miners who are solving it today are getting something like 6 point something Bitcoin.
No, less than that right now.
Right.
Yeah,
so I think from sort of 50 to like 6. So and also the other thing is the halving event is what, occurring every 4 years?
Every 4 years. And coincidentally, it also merges with the US election. So,
the timing is uncanny.
And that's precisely the reason why it looks like this time President Donald Trump wanted to take advantage of it, because the first Bitcoin halving did actually take place in 2012. And that time, there were 50 Bitcoins that were rewarded before that, and it got halved to 25 Bitcoin. And this goes back to the second part of the definition of electronic cash system.
Yeah.
So what happens is every 4 years, the newly minted Bitcoin gets reduced. So from 50, it went to 25. In 2016, from 25, it went down to 12.5. 2020, when a lot of people got introduced to Bitcoin, it went to 12.5, 6.25. And last year, it went down to 3.125 Bitcoin. And this goes back to the nature of demand and supply, isn't it? There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin be reduced, but the rate at which it is producing, it is gradually getting shorter.
So it's that whole scarcity, which obviously drives up the value. And it would be worth maybe pointing out that sort of these halving events, of which we had one in 2024, was the last halving event. There's sort of there tends to be these patterns, the pre-halving sort of accumulation phase of Bitcoin. Then there's this sort of post-halving kind of rally. We get this kind of market, whatever we want to call it, sort of excitement. And then there's the corrections and the bear market. So we've now done a few cycles of this. That people sort of anticipating, the before, the during, the after, what happens. And the price post-halving has always exponentially shot up. Not immediately, but sort of, that's what you can expect to happen after a halving event.
Absolutely. Usually around a period of 15 to 18 months after the halving, when the price of Bitcoin reaches to a new all-time high. So you can only anticipate what the price of Bitcoin would be, let's say, around November or December of 2025, because the price is already at $100,000 right now.
Yeah, we've already reached an all-time high. I don't know, did we hit another one today or yesterday?
Yesterday it was at $109,000, but it has gradually gone down.
And
but there's a lot of political.
Sorry, a year ago was it? When did it happen?
2024. I think it was somewhere in April of 2024.
April, right? Yeah. So
April of 2024. So if you look at it, let's say 15 or 18 months from April of 2024. That is usually historically when the price of Bitcoin reaches a new all-time high. Right. It happened in 2020. It happened in 2016. I remember in 2016, me and my friend were sending messages via Facebook Messenger. And the moment the price reached $600, we were really happy. The moment it touched $2,000, we started getting nervous. We were like, oh man, are we doing something illegal? Is the government going to go after us?
Yes.
Then it's $20,000. And now it is at $109,000. And this is, the genius of what Satoshi Nakamoto did. The only thing what I can tell our listeners is, let's say, if you don't understand how the Bitcoin white paper works, because there's some technical elements to it, just put it into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to explain it. Pretty simple, isn't it?
Your Bitcoin, your ChatGPT, your personal Bitcoin advisor, 100%.
Absolutely, 100%.
With these concepts, whatever it's just way too technical. I'll ask ChatGPT, can you explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old?
Exactly.
And give me an analogy. And I've started to try and teach my kids as well. Like, okay, cryptocurrencies, and this morning I was asking my daughter, "What's the price of Bitcoin today?" Just to get the terminology out. There's an awareness even with kids. Like, okay, you're now going to grow up with this new way or this kind of completely different financial alternative, right, or system.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's unfolding. I mean, it's Bitcoin is unfolding. Whether or not it stays true to the vision that Satoshi Nakamoto had. Now, given institutional money has come into it, I don't think it was ever invented for Wall Street, or so we're told. It's a decentralized sort of the whole kind of premise of why it came around seemed to be kind of that anti-centralization and anti-Wall Street, anti-institution, but it's definitely caught the interest of institutional money.
Yep. I think it's absolutely brilliant what you said. And I often ask my niece as well, how to go and look at information via ChatGPT. And she told me something about Grok, which is by Twitter.
The X.
The XAI. And I think we're getting quite a lot of information regarding that as well.
So is she using that?
Yeah, I'm using that as well, Grok. I think the number of parameters that they have is significantly higher than ChatGPT 4 as well. Okay. But yes, at a basic level, understanding what Bitcoin is it digital gold? Is it, peer-to-peer money? Is it scam? Is it purest form of money? As long as we just understand that it is peer-to-peer and electronic cash system, and basic level understanding that, there's no central intermediary involved, transactions are done peer-to-peer, and basic level of miners, how they got in mining Bitcoin, that's more than enough. The next thing, and this is something I really want to stress, and these are something called as the pillars of open blockchain. And a lot of narrative is built regarding blockchain and tokenization that we briefly touch base upon. Now, there are a couple of pillars of Bitcoin and open blockchain. Now, sadly, I'm not seeing these pillars being applied to a lot of blockchain protocol, in my honest opinion. But let's run through some of the pillars of Bitcoin and open blockchain. And this is kind of like a must. And only then we can say that, you're in purest sense, you're using Bitcoin or open blockchain. And the first one is open source.
Ah,
So what we mean, is pretty simple, that all of your source code or
code.
Bitcoin
Yeah.
is completely open source. So anyone can check it. Even my
Yeah.
niece who's 60-year-old, even my grandfather can check it. Anyone in the world can go ahead and check the source code of Bitcoin. Now the big question is, can you go ahead and change the code? What is your thoughts on changing the code for that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I suppose we'll be going into a realm that I'm not too familiar with. I know you can go to like GitHub and have a look at the source code, but changing code, I don't know. But code, would need iterating and improving, etc. So I guess if it's the developers that do work on the code, that it's because it's open source. There are developers who are iterating.
Yeah. And these developers, they need to take consensus from the entire world,
Community,
essentially.
yeah.
Community to go out and make the changes. Now, one change which a lot of people, even in the Bitcoin space, don't know is one of the updates, a very minor change, took literally 18 months to go out and make the change. Whereas in a centralized system, you could do it in just a matter of few hours. Yeah, because you need to take consensus. Because you need to get the miners involved, you need to go out and get the centralized exchanges involved. So when you talk about Bitcoin, you could make an argument that changes in Bitcoin is extremely slow.
It's extremely
next to
difficult.
difficult.
To get the consensus. Yeah, that
Exactly.
makes complete sense.
And that could be a strength as well. But let's say in a centralized system, is Facebook, as he has changed the fact checking thing, he didn't have to ask anyone. He just went out and made the changes instantly, isn't it?
Yeah, true. Didn't need to get consensus from anyone, not even the community of users.
Exactly. And we don't know what the source code for that is. Only the confined people within Meta, they know what the source code for that is.
Yeah.
And this is applicable even for blockchain technology, be it, let's say, Ethereum or Solana. But when you talk about central bank digital currencies, the source code, you could make an argument that the source code can be completely open source. But making any changes will only be done by, let's say, the central government or the selected officials. So that is one pillar of open blockchain. The second one is permissionless. Now, we talked about, if you want to go ahead and use a banking app, we need to take permission from a bank. We need to go ahead and do certain KYCs. But in case of Bitcoin, you don't need to do that.
No.
All transactions are permissionless. So in my experience, Dave, I'm seeing so many projects, even in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space, they are still asking you for KYC. And I'm like, why are you asking me KYC?
Yeah.
Because we need to verify that, you're a citizen of so-and-so country and a not from a sanctioned countries. Now, if you see that in a blockchain protocol, it is a big red flag and they do not follow, the pillars of Bitcoin open blockchain. And the next is borderless. This is kind of in similar point because when you talk about Bitcoin, you can do transactions like from Iran to Afghanistan, India to China. And I'm not sure, if you know that they have also done a transaction in space as well.
I found out from you.
So they've tried doing a transaction in space. And if our listeners, they want to go out and find out, you can go to a website called as Blockstream. And Blockstream CEO, the same guy, Adam Back, who I think could be Satoshi Nakamoto. And they are the ones, you talked about developers. A lot of the developers, they're actually working for Blockstream. But again, they can't make any changes. They have to take community consensus to go out and make any changes. Now, when you talk about borderless, not to make it a bit scary, but you can go out and make your Bitcoin transactions using radio frequency as well. And let's say if you're heading towards World War III or nuclear war, you can still go out and send Bitcoin using radio frequency. Which does not necessarily work with we can necessarily work with internet. Now the next is neutral, which just means the value of using Bitcoin is the same, be it any part of the world. Let's say if you're from a sanctioned country, let's say Iran, or let's say, if you're in some unfortunate situation, be it, let's say, due to geopolitical chaos, you can still have the ability to go out and use Bitcoin. And this touches base to the next pillar, that is censorship resistant, and something which we touched base earlier upon, miners. They can't even censor our transactions. Their role is only to go ahead and update the transactions onto the Bitcoin blockchain.
There's no bias there.
No bias at all. But when you talk about certain permission blockchain, in certain permission blockchain, and this is where we talk about tokenization, there's a lot of hype surrounding tokenization. they can go ahead and censor your transactions. I'm not sure if you use stablecoin at all, like Tether USDT.
No,
But
I
there's
don't.
something called Tether USDT is a stablecoin, and transactions
Also,
can be
Tether.
censored.
Yeah, sorry,
Tether, yeah.
yes, Tether.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
So these
Yeah,
transactions can be censored, yeah. But regarding Bitcoin, the transactions cannot be censored. And the final one is regarding transactions being publicly verifiable. So we talked, D is going to give me 10 Bitcoin. The entire world can know where the transactions have gone, who is it sent from, and who is it sent to.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
now,
yeah, and I think that's there. Then is the sort of that underpins the trust
exactly, yeah.
part of this whole equation in terms of the blockchain and the value of the blockchain.
Yes.
Being able to verify these transactions. So in a trust deficit economy, the blockchain sort of speaks to that.
Yeah, so all transactions is publicly verifiable. You don't even need to have Bitcoin to go ahead and verify it. What someone who is new into the space can just go to, let's say, a Bitcoin Explorer and just look at the transactions. We talked about the long series of numbers. You just put that, and it immediately shows what transactions have been done. Now, I do remember this was, I believe, in 2016, and Dr. Sunil Munir, who was the head of the Dubai Smart Government, he actually said that if criminals want to go ahead and use Bitcoin, please go ahead and use it, because you can immediately catch who you are, because all the transactions are completely open source.
You can, you can
and there's always you can always, correct.
Yeah, there's nowhere to hide, right? There's nowhere to hide.
Exactly, yeah. And there is always an entry point and an exit point, isn't it? So let's say an exit point would be a centralized exchange where you have to do your KYC, or let's say if you're buying it from an exchange, which is your entry point, that also you have to do your KYC. So yeah, that is essentially one of the beauties of pillars of open blockchain.
100%. So what you're saying is sort of, because the ramp on and the ramp off, to get money in, so you can start to transact in Bitcoin. The ramp on, there's a KYC process there, and then you do send whatever Bitcoin in the middle, and then the ramp off to get your money out, your Bitcoin out, say, back into fiat, for example. There's a ramp off, so there's a KYC there. So for law enforcement, it's they can have a look at the money movement here and sort of follow the trail.
Exactly.
Ramping on and ramping off as well.
And this is what, when I speak to a few politicians, back in the day, politicians used to not understand what Bitcoin is. And I used to give them an example, and they used to not like it, but they used to understand it. And I used to tell them, let's say you've given a promise to your people that, you're going to, let's say, build a bridge. And let's say, assuming that the transactions are done only in Bitcoin, you have promised them that you're going to spend, let's say, 100 Bitcoins in building a bridge. Everyone can validate and check, are you spending 100 Bitcoins on the bridge? Are you paying it to your suppliers, or is it going into your pocket? And they understand, now we know what Bitcoin is, and that's the reason why we want to block it.
It's a great example, and it's also a good example of the sort of the good actors' use of Bitcoin, because I know there's a perception of, and there is a portion of the market where there may be bad actors, who've been transacting for scammy things,
illicit activities and scammy purposes, and people are caught as well. And just yesterday, I believe in my Crypto Coffee Date podcast, I talked about some transactions. The person was trying to use someone else's KYC, but they eventually still managed to catch him.
Right, interesting.
Yeah. So I think this, at the basic level, you just understand some of these pillars of open blockchain. I think that's more than enough just for someone getting new into the space. Now, the big question is, and probably that'll be the last part of this particular session, can we go ahead and use these pillars of Bitcoin and open blockchain in artificial intelligence? So it's like, open source. I think what Elon Musk is doing with XAI is brilliant, because the source code is completely open source. So if there's any notorious thing, everyone can go ahead and check if, the AI is politically aligned or not politically aligned, or is it apolitical? I think that is a brilliant use case. Now, can the other pillars be applied to this? I think there needs to be a lot of work done, isn't it? Things like permissionless. Can it be censored? Can it be publicly verifiable? Now, when you're talking about artificial intelligence, I would not want what I typed into ChatGPT to be publicly verifiable.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I had a long conversation with ChatGPT one evening, and I was asking ChatGPT all sorts of all sorts of things. What's the most asked question that you've been asked, etc. And ChatGPT won't reveal certain things, of course, because that's kind of proprietary information. If we knew the top 10 most, the sort of, it's what Google, when you Google does, or I don't know if it's Google or a different website which looks at the most common top questions that Google is asked, etc. But that all lends itself to how the advertising in Google works. But for the ChatGPT is not going to tell us all the key core information of how people are using it. What percentage of people are using it for nefarious questions versus this versus that. And I guess obviously the developers can start to dissect how people are using it, but it wouldn't give me that information. So it's understandably, why would it? I think so. Yeah, so I mean, it's open source, but it can't obviously or won't give us everything.
Especially our personal information, you would not want to keep it out as well.
100% no, yeah. But if we were to sort of sort of ask ChatGPT about its user base and how many females this, how many males do that, who's asking, what's the demographics of, I don't know how much it can share in terms of the analytics behind the users. I don't know.
I even asked the chat code or the source code for ChatGPT, and it says no, we can't give that thing out. We can create another ChatGPT, but XAI, I think it is completely open. I think with AI, I think as long as we have the source code completely open source, it's more than enough. We don't need to do anything else, and because then it becomes the user experience, isn't it? There are so many user experience, so you need to focus on user experience, because one thing which we talked about Bitcoin is the update takes a lot of time, 18 months for a teeny tiny update. You don't want that thing to happen in your AI. You want the experience to be super, super fast, isn't it? So
totally. I was sort of thinking, when you were speaking, I was thinking about, in terms of open source, I can't see, Facebook will have its access to all its, content and data. I can't see them making that available to Google making it available to Amazon, etc. Microsoft's Copilot is collecting so much information. Can't see them making, each of them. I mean, how much are they going to share?
Share, correct,
to make AI sort of truly open source.
And now there's this hype surrounding regarding central bank digital currency. Now with central bank digital currency, the thing is, some of the countries, they are deciding to keep the source code open source, but they are not using the cryptography hashing algorithm, which means the double spending can still occur.
Right.
So what they're doing is, I think it is the bank from Norway, if I'm not mistaken, they want to make the source code completely open source. I might be wrong in that.
Okay.
But what they're saying is we are using something completely different. But with central bank digital currency, the central authorities, they can go and double spend. They can also freeze your account, and that is something which cannot be done with Bitcoin, isn't it?
Yeah. So I suppose, I mean, they're just fundamentally very different in their DNA.
Yep.
Yes, at a high level, digital currencies, and that's probably, that's a likeness. But then when you sort of delve deeper into the DNA of how their purpose and intention behind both, they are fundamentally very different.
Yep.
Just from pure centralized versus decentralized. Let's start. You can just start there.
Exactly, And I think that's pretty much all, isn't it? I mean, we've covered pretty much everything at the very, very basic beginner level.
Yeah.
I think a quick recap, we talked about the different definition of Bitcoin. We shared the example of, how Bitcoin works. It's peer-to-peer. We talked about Satoshi Nakamoto's definition of peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Very briefly touched base on what peer-to-peer is, what electronic cash system is. Ran through the Bitcoin halving and talked about the pillars of open blockchain. And I think it's for newcomers, as long as they understand this, I think it's more than enough.
It's a good starting point. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the advanced session, we'll go ahead and dig into deeper in terms of, how the secure hashing algorithm works, what is the private key, public key, and at the technical level, we'll literally go and show what that thing is. But thanks so much, Dee, for doing this. Really
thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to have a little chat and go back to the beginnings. Considering Bitcoin's come so far in such such a short space of time, right?
Yeah, because in my honest opinion, I do feel that when I speak to a lot of people, at least now, they don't know. When I tell them about double spend, they don't know what it is. And what is a bit
Yeah.
scary is that they do have a lot of Bitcoin and they're working on a lot of cryptocurrency projects and they've got millions of dollars in investment. And then they don't understand the pillars of open blockchain or even double spending. That raises a bit of red flag. So I thought, let's focus on beginner level, advanced level, and let's see if what the response to this is. So thanks so much, Dee, for doing this very much. Yeah, have a nice one.